This is something that is going to affect us right here at home in Canada, where all of us live. And yeah, this is going to shape the next 4 years. I am, of course, talking about the upcoming election on April 28th. And yeah, this election is, again, I don't want to like fear monger or like hype it up or anything like that, but I do think that this is one of the most important elections we've had in a very long time, possibly in like decades. I don't know if it's like, the election of the century or anything, but it's getting up there in terms of importance because we're at I hope you guys are not tired of living in unprecedented times because we are living in unprecedented times. And whoever wins this election is going to have to, deal with Trump. That's obviously the main thing, but also manage the Canadian economy, which has not been doing well. I think we can all admit, regardless of what you think about any political party, it has not been doing well just objectively, like the economy or the country as a whole, for the past decade or so, right? And yeah, it's going to take a lot to kind of fix a lot of the problems that we're experiencing. But let me just kind of, you know, give you the backdrop of what we want to talk about tonight. So, the backdrop is that the Liberals are continuing to surge in the polls, and 338 Canada, which is a poll aggregator site, is putting the Liberals in majority territory now. So the most likely outcome is a Liberal majority with Mark Carney as our next prime minister, if nothing else changes, and if the polls are accurate. Maybe the polls are not completely accurate, which we'll talk about later on, or actually right now. So what if the polls like are not accurate, and what if it is accurate, right? So I've seen two kind of stories, right? So the first story is that the Liberals continue to surge in the polls, as I've said. But the second story, and this is anecdotal, but I've seen a lot of indications where Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, he's been doing all these rallies, and sometimes they're in densely populated areas, but sometimes they're not in densely populated areas. And wherever he goes, he draws in big crowds. Right. So this is a, a photo from one of his recent rallies, where Stephen Harper's biggest rally in 2011, which was a majority year for the Conservatives, that was 2,000 people. But reportedly, this Pierre Poilievre rally had 4,500 people on a random weeknight in the winter. So, at least according to the Pleb reporter, who's granted, he's a very pro-conservative channel on X, but according to the Pleb reporter, he's saying that like it doesn't match up, right? Because Pierre's drawing these massive crowds, and it appears that Carney is having trouble drawing massive crowds. Granted, this was in I think St. John's, Newfoundland, which is not a very densely populated place. But Mark Carney was in Newfoundland, where he had a rally where only a hundred or so people showed up, apparently, or a couple hundred. But a large part of the people that showed up were actually not like cheering for Mark Carney. They were there to protest because the Liberal Party has had, apparently, again, I'm not a fisherman. This is hearsay from me, but I've heard that Mark Carney, or not Carney himself, but the Liberals have in the past put in a lot of anti fishermen kind of laws on limiting how much fish they could catch, and that's created some resentment among the fishermen in Newfoundland, because that's one of their main kind of sources of income, because again, it's not a very developed place, and a lot of people rely on fishing for a living over in Newfoundland. So a bunch of fishermen showed up to protest, and then Carney had to call the police on them, and then basically eventually they like locked out a bunch of the supporters, or a bunch of the protesters outside of the building, and the police wouldn't let them in because they're afraid that they're gonna like cause too much trouble. So yeah, I've seen instances where there was also another story that I haven't that I didn't include in the docket, but apparently there was like Mark Carney went to a factory, like some type of like mill or factory, to like do a rally, do a press conference in front of the press, and then the workers were standing behind him, and apparently the workers are very anti-liberal. So I don't know why he decided to like get a bunch of people that he didn't that doesn't support him to like kind of stand behind him. Maybe like the company that the workers worked for made them do it. But regardless, one of the guys apparently refused to shake Mark Carney's hand because he hated the liberals so much. And I'm just seeing a lot of these types of stories happen with Mark Carney and the liberals, where they're not getting a lot of support among like the working class, and then the crowd sizes for the rallies are noticeably smaller than Pierre Polyev. So it's just a lot of. I know this is all anecdotal. But it just seems like it doesn't match up with what I'm seeing in the polls, right? Because every poll that I'm seeing, the liberals have just been going up, like every single poll, and they go up more as time goes on. So the trend is not reversing in the polls. But what I'm seeing from anecdotal evidence is that support for the conservatives still seem to be rather high. And maybe like if the polls are wrong, and I'm not saying that they're wrong, but if the polls are wrong, it might be due to kind of the way that Mark Carney himself has handled some of the questions from reporters and stuff. Now, I think it was Tristan, you last week, you brought up something about how, you had concerns about Pierre Polyev because he's, sometimes he's rude to the press, or at least perceived to be rude to the press. But it seems to me that Mark Carney is also kind of rude to the press sometimes. So there was a French reporter who asked him a question in French, and then I think it was something that Mark Carney didn't want to answer, because I know there's some like controversy about him not disclosing his assets and stuff. And then he answered, "That's enough, okay," but in French, right? But it translates to "that's enough." Like, I don't want to talk about it, and it's just like a very stern response. And yeah, this is kind of a little bit concerning in my opinion, because this whole like controversy about him not disclosing his assets and stuff, I think that that's like that is a bit of concern. Like, if you're running for prime minister, then you should probably disclose any potential conflicts of interest, right? And it's not like people are accusing him of conflicts of interest directly. It's just, if you have no conflicts of interest, then you should be able to disclose your assets and stuff. That's not a very big ask, in my opinion. But maybe other people have different opinions. So yeah, it's just the way that he's responded to some questions has been questionable. And there was also another instance where his like it's clear that Mark Carney's French is not very good. Uh, I mean, it's better than mine, which is like no French. I don't speak any French at all. So it's better than mine, but maybe that's not saying much. So there was a question that was asked in French, and he he answered it halfway in French, and then I guess his brain just stopped working because he couldn't remember how to answer the rest of the question in French, because it got too complicated, and then he just switched to English. But yeah, I mean, I guess maybe some Quebecers, I can't speak for Quebecers, but maybe some Quebecers would not look upon that so kindly, because Quebecers really care about French. Although it does seem like the Liberals' support, especially in places like Montreal, is surging. So maybe Montrealers don't care, but other people in Quebec, I'm sure, will probably care. Anyways, all of this is kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And hopefully, maybe we can badger Tristan again about a potential endorsement. Um, but yeah, even if you don't want to give an endorsement, just at least maybe respond to some of the things that have come up either on Pierre Poilievre or on Mark Carney, and has your opinion of any of these candidates changed? And I'll throw in like Jagmeet Singh in there, or Elizabeth May, or whoever you want to talk about as well, if you want to talk about any of the other candidates. But has your opinion changed on any of the candidates? And what do you think of all the stories that I talked about now that we're in our first week of a federal election campaign?
This isn't necessarily explicitly what you were saying, but Carney's also just been stealing a lot of stuff from the conservative platform, and now he's throwing some sass at the press too. Kind of seems like the Liberals were like, "We're gonna lose to the cons, so we'll just become the cons." Like, honestly, like they're like, "Oh, we're gonna cut taxes. We're gonna, what was the other? We're gonna cut the carbon tax. We're gonna do all these things straight from Pierre's playbook." So it just feels like Carney is really just copying Pierre. And so on that front, it really comes to, do you trust the Liberals? I guess Sunil's saying Jagmeet promised tax cuts. Did he really? That's hilarious. I didn't hear about that. But yeah, I guess they're all promising.
I just saw it late in the day. It was late in the day. I just saw a headline that Jagmeet saying that said promised tax cuts, and I thought that was funny, just based on what you were saying yesterday on the group chat.
Yeah, everyone's just like, what's working in the polls? Let's just grab that from everyone else, Like, it's kind of crazy. I think it really comes down to who the heck do you think is actually legit on this front? Like, who's actually going to do what they say, and who's just talking out of both sides of their mouth? Because like, I feel like a lot of this is they're saying stuff to get elected, and then when they're not, like when they're actually in power, there's so many reasons why I can't do that. Just like how the Liberals in back in like 2015 or 2019, I don't remember which election there was, or I don't even remember when the previous elections were, but I remember there was one of them where the NDP was like really pushing for proportional representation, and the Libs were like, "We'll do that," and then they were also like, "We're just not actually going to do that." Just kidding. Everyone forget about that one. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Just forget about that. No one heard of that. No one voted for us because of that, right? So at this point, I feel like the Liberals are really just grabbing for anything to get them support. Desperately. I mean, I guess Jagmeet's doing it too with his tax cuts. So it just, yeah, I feel like we're at the point where it's like, who do you believe is actually being truthful? Do you want Carney, who is clearly just grabbing stuff off of Pierre's notepad and planning to do things that way? Or you've got Pierre, who's apparently providing everyone's notepad. Like, everyone was just like, that Pierre guy, he's doing pretty good in the polls. Let's just copy some of that over.
Bro, can I copy your homework? It's like, yeah, sure, but just change it up a little.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like at this point, because they're becoming so similar also, I feel like this helps Pierre more than it helps Carney, because Pierre, one, has been saying it this whole time. So you can't be like, or like saying this sorts of stuff. You can't really be like, Pierre's changing his perspective. He's changing what he's saying. And to be fair, Carney wasn't explicitly saying anything prior to now because he was non-existent prior to now. But I feel like the fact that Pierre's been saying it for so long, he's been, holding these rallies and stuff and getting lots of support. I think that it's probably, it definitely feels more likely that he'll actually do some of what he says. Particularly since a lot more of it is aligned with his kind of perspective, like their kind of the conservative kind of perspective of like tax cuts and stuff. So we're kind of gonna have to see how it plays out. I don't think I think Carney is setting himself up to be more no, not progressive, the other one, conservative than the previous leaders that have been like Trudeau, that's been in power, because he's definitely supporting a lot more things that are towards the center. So he's trying to appeal to the majority of the population that exists somewhere between the conservatives, the extreme conservatives, and the extreme progressives. So I think in the long run, that's probably a good strat, but it makes him harder to differentiate from Pierre, since most of Pierre's big items were on the front of towards that middle of the group of people who were like, I don't really care. I just want to be able to buy my stuff, go to my job, get paid, go home. I want to be able to have a house. Like the people who are, the majority of the population, not the people who are like, but what about the rights all the time? It's like, the average person, not the more of the extremists on either side. So I think this is probably a good strat in the long run for the libs. And I think on the regards to the media stuff, it's just like the Carney does not seem nearly as camera ready as some of the others. He's definitely kind, and honestly, I think his French is really harming him too, because him, like, one of the examples here of him being like, that's enough kind of thing, like, but the French person, are you even sure that he knew that was going to come off as rude in French? Because like, I'm not suitably convinced his French is good enough to actually know that he would be sounding rude,
I mean, even in English, it sounds kind of terse, right?
Well,
And actually, I was maybe like trying to give him credit the other way, where maybe it sounds bad in English, but maybe it doesn't sound as bad in French, because I'm speaking from a non-French speaker's perspective, so I don't know, right? But like, is it for, I don't know if there's any audience members that will be watching this show that speaks French, but like, if you do speak French, leave it down in the comments and be like, hey, is it really rude to just like cut somebody off and say that's enough, but in French? Like, I don't know, is that like a normal thing to do, or is it the same between English and French? Like, because I don't know, like, yeah, especially if it's something that's like a fair question, which I think, like, if I remember correct, I don't remember exactly what the question was, but I don't think it was a super unreasonable question. If it was a fair question, then like, and you just cut somebody off and be like, no, that's enough, I don't want to answer it anymore. It comes off as pretty rude to me from my elementary understanding of like French, and just how, like, I don't know, culture works in general. I don't really know what to say here, but yeah, anyone else has any thoughts?
I mean, I guess like the first observation is that the Liberals aren't running on their records. So that's like a weak way of campaigning. It's just not a good sign that they don't have anything that they want to be proud of. I mean, we talked about this last week. They're already running away from the carbon tax and everything. And then, as Tristan mentioned, like, they're actually like copying some of Pierre's election promises. So sometimes this stuff works in elections. Like, it worked when the Liberals copied the NDP, but for us, like, it's very transparent that the Liberals are running away from their record. So it's not a good look. And with Jagmeet joining in on the tax cuts, like, it's a pendulum shift. Like, there's a lot of the talking points that you would hear from the left over the last 10 years just aren't being said right now. Like, they're not talking about taxes for the rich, or the rich have to pay their fair share. They're saying a lot more like neoliberal talking points. So that's just a bad sign that both the Liberals and NDP are like kind of running away from their record and are not comfortable saying left-wing things, which they have been comfortable saying in the last like 15 years. So I think that's weird. But I mean, I'm sure they will still like try to get their base electrified during this campaign. I think this is just the early days of the campaign where they're kind of trying to set themselves and kind of set a positive narrative around the campaign. But I mean, I think it's like the previous comment. Like, I think it's definitely a circumstantial election. Like, it's consequential. It's there's this young versus old element where a lot of the working class people are actually like very young because like young people are working, and there seems to be a big divide between people who are established, have their houses paid for, have had like nice lives in Canada, and they feel fairly comfortable right now. And the Liberals have also like indicated they're very interested in making sure boomers like property values stay like afloat and stuff. So the Liberals have done a good job like signaling to like the senior citizens of this country that like they're behind them. So it's working. That aspect of the Liberal campaign is definitely working. I think that Pierre Poilievre certainly has a better grassroots advantage in his campaign. Like we're talking about crowd sizes. Like it just shows you that he's connecting with workers, he's connecting with people, and it's a good sign that he's connecting with the right type of voters. He's not just connecting with like rich bankers and stuff. He's in the types of voters that should be voting for NDP and Liberals historically are now very much on side of Poilievre. So that's interesting. But I mean, it's not. I don't think it's all good for Carney. For Poilievre. I think that there's something he's been making some mistakes. I'm actually very disappointed because he's the first conservative candidate I've ever like kind of gotten excited about, and I was excited about him because he was like very bold. He was quick on the mic. He was willing to fight the media. He was willing to push back against just like nonsense that was said about him, like them calling him alt-right or a Nazi or whatever that is. And now he seems to be very like going during the tariff debate. I think the conservatives took a much more like conservative consultant type approach, which is like stay quiet, don't say anything, don't ruffle any feathers. I thought it was a great opportunity for Poilievre to get out there and show how he's different than the Liberals and even break some convention, go on podcasts in the US, fight for Canada's side. I mean, there was the thing in the news where the PBD podcast called out Poilievre because he denied their invitation. I think that was a great opportunity for him to go on a pro-Trump podcast. He didn't need to be nice to them. He could have gone on the podcast and fought them and argued with them and like differentiated himself as a fighter for Canada. And it was a missed opportunity, in my opinion. And I think there's been a lot of missed opportunities. I think that if Poilievre continues to rely on the media as his microphone, they're gonna keep covering him in a very negative way. The coverage is already very, very negative, trying to tie him to MAGA, trying to tie him to like alt-right or extreme right politics. And like it's not going to be a fair fight. The media clearly likes the Liberals. I think that there's a financial element to it because they realize that if the Conservatives win, all their funding that's keeping the Canadian media from collapsing is going to dry up. So I mean, the only way that Poilievre can change the script is if he gets off. He gets like in like internet lingo. If he gets out of the matrix and kind of goes on like long form podcasts, and that's the only way he could break the script. That's the only way he can force the conversation to change. Because as long as the conversation is within traditional media, they're just going to serve the Liberals. And that's why I think polls are moving in the Liberals' directions. I've been watching even Google Trends. It's moving in the Liberals' direction. Poilievre's losing this race. If he keeps doing what he's doing and relying on the traditional media to argue his points, he's going to lose. I think that Carney's going to win this campaign if that's the case. I do think the Poilievre needs to be a little bit more bold. He needs to be, when I started liking Poilievre was when he was putting out ideas about Bitcoin. He was putting out a lot of bold ideas, and he wasn't acting like a normal like neocon. But now he's kind of acting. I feel like he's acting a bit like a neocon. I feel like even his tax strategy on TFSA should have been bolder. I think that this is an opportunity to have like a libertarian type candidate that like proposes things like 0% taxes on Canadian business to try to like help Canadian business get through this moment. And I don't think that Poilievre's doing a great job. I think he's doing an adequate job. I think he could squeeze one through. He could potentially get a minority government, but I'm not seeing majority territory for the Conservatives. I'm seeing some things going in their favor, like the crowd sizes and stuff. But he has to break through further. He has to get some people on the in the senior citizens to vote for him. There's a lot of people on the fence in like our age group that he needs to get to vote for him. And I think the only way he can break through is to do something bold, like go on Joe Rogan. They're gonna call him a Nazi or they're gonna call him alt right anyways. So like they might as well call him, go on Joe Rogan, get called a Nazi, and then have 15 to 20 million Canadians watch him in long form or watch 25-minute clips of him talking to Rogan, and it's going to change their opinions. Anecdotally, I've even seen conservatives come out and say, like, I'm a moderate conservative, I'm going to vote for Carney because he's an economist. The media is supporting Carney, and he's going to win if this is the way Poilievre decides to approach the campaign. So I think that he needs to be bolder, and he needs to break through the media bubble. He needs to get out of the matrix. And I had one more point here. Yeah, I think Carney does come across as very wooden and boring, and he seems out of place, and it just doesn't seem to be his element. And he's not attracting working class voters, but he's still leading in the polls, so that scares me. And I think that what I said in the previous point is exactly why that's happening. I actually don't think Poilievre's running a great campaign yet.
You actually changed my mind around the Pierre Poilievre going on alternative media type of stuff, because at first I was kind of a little bit scared of the potential of Pierre going on American media because of the sentiment right now between pro-Trump, especially pro-Trump podcasters like Joe Rogan and Patrick Bet-David and all that stuff. But yeah, what you're saying is right. I actually agree with you now. I think you convinced me that it just on the baseline, right? Whatever Pierre is doing, it's clearly not working. So if he continues down the same path, then he's going to lose. So I think at this point, he doesn't really have that much to lose more by going on American media. And by the way, Carney kind of soft launched his own campaign on the Jon Stewart Daily Show. I'm not sure if you guys remember that, but liberals are apparently they're okay with that, and nobody's calling, Carney the next MAGA pro-Trump candidate, right? Even though he worked a lot in America, and he's worked obviously as the Bank of England governor, so he lived in London for a long time, and not London, Ontario, but London, England. So yeah, I mean, it's I definitely think that there needs to be, just like the market, I feel like the conservatives and the stock market are kind of two things that are tied together somehow. I don't know how. Obviously, I don't think the Canadian conservatives are big enough or famous enough to move the S&P 500, but yeah, it's just there needs to be a sentiment change. Right now, they're both going down. And if nothing changes, then it's just going to keep going down, and then we're going to be stuck in a rut forever. Yes, Sunil, you had something to add.
Yeah, I just had 2 points to add. One is that if this campaign continues to be about the tariffs, and that's a central issue, I think Carney's going to win, because the media clearly is good, and the media is a part of that issue. If maybe Pierre can break through and get on Joe Rogan and fight for Canadian issues on that platform, but he's not going to be able to get a fair fight in the Canadian media. So I don't know. I forget what I was going to say. Forget this. It doesn't matter. But the other point I wanted to say is that considering the whole French situation, I think my boy Chandra Arya deserves an apology from the Liberal Party.
Yeah, no. So in case you guys are not filled in about what happened with Chandra Arya, he was kicked out of the leadership race for the Liberals because apparently because of French or the lack thereof of French. And then he was also denied the opportunity to run in Nepean, however you say it. It's like a suburb of Ottawa, which is his former seat, and then now he's not allowed to run in that seat. and the Liberal Party gave a bunch of, random reasons like, oh, like we're afraid that he's connected with India, right? Which we're not on the best terms with India right now, let's just say. So, I guess like if he was actually connected with India, I guess that would be a valid reason. But then also, there's no like solid evidence, or at least I haven't seen any, of how Chandra Arya is influenced by India in any way. And besides, like they let him run last time, right? So it's like it's convenient that when there's an election finally, and you know they need to open up a seat for Mark Carney, which is the second part of this story, where they deny Chandra Arya the ability to run in Nepean. And then guess who announced that they're running a Nepean instead of Chandra Arya? It's Mark Carney himself. Right? So I don't know. It's just kind of like suspicious or convenient that a seat just so happened to open up in a district that is I wouldn't say overwhelmingly liberal, but it's like a pretty safe liberal seat, right? And like there's like a pretty much like a 95% likelihood that Carney will win his seat if he runs in Nepean. So yeah, I mean that's that. And I just want to also talk about your point earlier, Sunil, about the media being kind of pro left or pro liberals. I definitely see that as well. And it's funny how the media, and maybe some people would dispute me on this and say, oh, the mainstream media, they're objective, they're not pro left. Like, come on, right? Like if you were to be honest with yourself, I think that, and you spend just a little bit of time watching like CBC or CTV or any of the mainstream platforms, they're very clearly, I would say, pro the progressive side, right? And even with a pro progressive media, there's still media gaffes that Mark Carney is making, right? Like all the stuff about being rude to reporters and stuff. Like Carney is doing a lot of that as well. Or I would say that Pierre is not even like rude to the media. That's just the way that they paint him, which is going to be the way that the media conducts itself. But even with like a media that's technically on Mark Carney's side, there's like instances where he has gaffes and stuff like that. So I just think that, yeah, like Pierre's definitely like there's something that he needs to do to change this, where I actually think that Mark Carney is probably a weak candidate, or at least he's not the best candidate that the Liberals could have run. But it's just he's still winning because there's all these like narratives and stuff, like the reasons that Sunil you said earlier, right? But
And
yeah,
the media isn't reporting on any of the controversy around Mark Carney's candidacy. Like they're not reporting on anything, like his Brookfield deals, moving jobs to the U.S. and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, or they did report on it, but it was like very quickly in and out, right? Like there was maybe like one or two stories, and I've seen then some stories on the National Post, which is kind of the only maybe slightly right-leaning mainstream media source. A lot of the stories that are anti-Mark Carney I've seen from the National Post, but like I feel like nobody else is saying anything. Like if you're a CBC watcher or CTV News, which is owned by Bell, which is like granted they're probably deeply connected with both major parties, but CTV has been really pro left, I would say. So yeah, I mean, it's just there's a lot of kind of these uh, progressive sentiment in the media, and then Mark Carney is still messing up sometimes, despite
There are also financial incentives for the media because the Liberal government funds the Canadian media through because it was like a bailout that they put through. Like the Conservatives have made it very clear that if they win the election, they're going to cut the media off from public funding. There is a financial element. I'm not saying that that's the reason why, but like I don't know, when there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, there's a financial element here, and ever since the media, like Globe and Mail used to be like a newspaper that was like kind of conservative, but sometimes would go liberal, and like ever since they got public funding from the media, they're pretty much a liberal newspaper now.